Forbes India Resilient Masterminds, powered by Microsoft.
Thank you so much for joining us at the Forbes India Resilient Mastermind, powered by Microsoft. We have Dr. K. Hariprasad, Group President, Apollo Hospitals, Mr. Jayaraj Shanmugam, the CEO of Bangalore International Airport Ltd, Mr. L.Ravichandran, the CEO of Tech Mahindra, and Mr. Rajiv Sodhi, the CEO of Microsoft India. We are coming to the end of another year, a year that has been abnormal in many ways. A raging pandemic and a resultant economic crisis put a pause to our way of life as we had known for many decades. The crisis has also tested the resilience of not only every individual, but the organization across function, forcing companies to take a relook at developing capabilities to tackle ambiguity and unpredictability. Research shows that investments in key digital resilience levers result in aggregated cost savings of between 15 and 25%. Let me begin by asking this panel for their opening comments on what went through your mind when the lockdown was announced, and what were your top priorities as CEO, not just limited to health and safety protocols. So we can start with Mr. Rajiv Sodhi.
This has been a very different year. And as soon as the pandemic happened, of course, our top concern was the health and safety of our employees, moving them to remote operations almost overnight. We had a crisis management team that was kind of giving information to our employees, almost on a daily basis to start with, which was there. The second thought was also to work with our customers, our partners, governments, to help them manage and respond to the crisis. I think that was the primary job that all of us were playing. And I think it was just fascinating to see whether you look at governments sharing information or doing disaster management efforts, or you look at schools and communities, moving to remote education, which all of us are very familiar with now. Businesses, starting from the large enterprises to the small businesses, having, teams, using teams like what we are using right now to do remote conferencing, access to their applications, securing their infrastructure, or even if you look at first line workers, people who were involved in relief efforts, they were all using technology, or they all needed technology to start this remote working piece. And a lot of our focus was there. The third thing we also realized was there was a need to provide easier access to digital skills. Since technology was becoming so mainstream, people had to be skilled on digital technologies, right? And it goes across the ecosystem. So we partnered, we started an initiative which is to empower over 25 million people worldwide to have digital skills, to look at what jobs are in demand, what skills will they need, and then provide them the certification and the content to do that. So I think these were some of the initial thoughts, how can we enable everyone to respond to the crisis and then reimagine their business, reimagine their protocols, and also provide access to digital skilling, which has become the need of the hour.
Let me come to you, Mr. Jayaraj, because I'm sure, before the lockdown was announced, 2 days, 3 days before that, the aviation industry had virtually come to a standstill. So what were your thoughts at that point, and what were your top priorities at that juncture?
As an airport operator, we knew it was coming because we started preparing for the pandemic very early when it was announced, when the world found out about Wuhan in December last year. We have about 28,000 people working in the entire airport community. It's not only BIAL, but the entire airport community. We have to make sure we communicate to every one of them what this lockdown actually meant to them as operators of the airport. So we had a whole list of, we worked our marketing team, we worked our business continuity team to make sure that every one of them knew exactly what this lockdown meant to them. There's no playbook, as you all know, there's no playbook to handle this pandemic. So We're all going on a best effort basis, but most important is that communicate. People needed to know what this meant to them, what this meant to their livelihood, and how is the airport going to handle operations, because cargo operation was still going on.
Mr. Ravichandran, huge workforce that you also have, how the moment the announcement was made, what went through your mind? What were your top priorities? Of course, not just with health and safety protocol, but with, in continuing operations.
It was a complete shock. When that announcement was made by the Prime Minister, we looked at, there was a flood in Chennai. So how do you run Pune operations to give support? And so we always have 2 ODCs for every customer. So 24/7 support can be given. And so we have to completely rewrite the book. And work from home policy was a perk.
Right.
It was obviously a complete shock that 125,000 employees who are supporting global customers just cannot come to work. And then we got customer concurrence, the customer security, who will never allow us so many things. It will take 3 months. They were giving approval overnight.
Absolutely.
And then we went to the government through NASCOM and we said, can we get some emergency policy changes, which
Absolutely.
will allow us to work from home. So the government was super fast.
So, Mr. Hariprasad, how was your experience during this whole lockdown when it was announced?
Our challenge was significantly different from all the other sectors. While all the other sectors tried to ensure continuum of work by keeping away the people, keeping the people away from work.
Right.
We had the other challenge that we had to get in people to work because healthcare cannot be provided remotely. So we had to ensure that people had to come to work. We had to ensure that there were enough medical supplies available for the epidemic. Then we had to make sure that there were enough non-medical supplies available for the epidemic. And most importantly, we had to ensure that the patients could reach the hospital even in a lockdown. It was not just about medical support. There was a lot of psychological element involved. Even companies which were offering work from home services very quickly realized that there was a lot of psychological element for these people to work from home because it was a new thing that was happening. So the beginning was challenging, but I think over a period of time, not only Apollo Hospitals, but I think that as a country, we stood up to the challenge pretty well.
Let me bring in Rajiv here. Rajiv, what has been your experience, with remote operations, and what does the future of the workplace look like now as we move into the next year?
One critical aspect in the beginning was making sure that information is, and the right information, the credible information is going to citizens, it's going to your employees, it's going to your customers and partners about the state of operations. And I think that is going to be key even in the future, right? As people have now adjusted to remote working. One fallout of that also has been the amount of importance around mental well-being and mental stress that's coming in, because as all of us know, weekends have become a blur. 9 to 5 is out of the window. Time is just a continuous motion, and you can pretty much call anyone anytime. And I think people have also felt that there is a lot of fatigue that comes in, with your video on and doing conference calls all the time. And so one of the things I believe, Manu, that will happen is obviously the hybrid work here is to stay, right? As the world emerges from this pandemic.
Absolutely.
But what's important is that we need to have a people first approach, right? We need to keep people at center. You need to have policies that allow that flexibility, no matter where a person is working from, what hours the person is working on. So I think there is a very big emphasis that is going to come on that. I think we've done a lot of innovations inside the team's product and our technology itself, such that it becomes easier, right? So we introduced this together mode. Where you can see everyone under a common frame. It reduces video fatigue that your eyes have. People have started missing their commute, because that commute to office used to give you that 5-minute, 10-minute of just preparing your thoughts or coming in. So we've now introduced a virtual commute experience inside Teams so that you get that 5 or 10 minutes to look at that. And then I think it's also very important for your culture. Because in the future workplace, like I said, you'll have to be people first. So you'll have to make sure that you are simplifying your operations. You're bringing clarity inside your organization on what is important, what needs to be prioritized, so that people can save that time and then put that time to either at their home or what they're going to do. So I think it's going to require all three. It requires your policies to be flexible. It requires your managers and your leadership to be very empathetic. And of course, it'll need technology, because this entire hybrid work is on the bedrock of technology that we are working.
Mr. Jayaraj, in that sense, Rajiv spoke about putting people first, the evolution of the hybrid work model. Do you have the freedom to have that sort of a model at your workplace?
No, see, 80% of our staff are all in frontline operations.
Okay.
Right. So in fact, myself, 3 weeks after the lockdown, I was back in the office.
Okay.
Preparing for, because at that point in time, we thought after 1 month, operations would restart. So we had to come back, maintain the terminal, and make sure that the sanitization processes are all in place. And we kept coming back to the office, but we took turns because the operations were not there. We took turns to come back to the office. So not much of a work from home for us in that sense. But having said that, a lot of meetings were done online because there was no more face-to-face meetings. But I, as the Chief Operating Officer, made it very clear, no meetings will start before 9:30, and there's a hard stop at 6 p.m. every day.
Okay.
Saturday and Sunday, no meetings unless it's urgent. Don't call me, and I won't call you.
Mr. Ravichandran, during this crisis, another thing that has absolutely been important is striking a balance between cost effectiveness and an empathetic sort of leadership. So, how do you actually strike the balance between empathetic and cost effective leadership? In between a crisis like this.
The solution was obviously very, very simple. That's a culture. Take care of the people, and then if they are able to service your global customers, then the business will take care of itself. And so we made sure that all the employees, or if they have to work, the desktops and laptops gave them, and we bought additional broadband and other connectivity at company cost where their broadband was not there.
Let me bring in Dr. Hariprasad here. A couple of questions here. I mean, I know you guys adopted to technology and virtual chatbots and everything as soon as this came out. So, this whole hybrid work model, is this the future that you see? And secondly, the other question about striking a balance between, empathetic and cost-effective leadership during times like this.
There has been a big transformation in terms of the way the patient is taken care of. The models of care have changed. A lot of digital models have come into play. It's not just about teleconsultation. We've started telepathology, where people don't need to travel. You take a picture and send it to the pathologist, and they report. Teleradiology. And then one of the biggest challenges during the pandemic was people were sick and people were all over the place. And India is one country where there is a severe shortage of intensivists, critical care specialists. So we developed a model called the EICU, where we set up a hub and connected it with multiple centers across different parts of the country, and even in Tier 2, Tier 3 and rural areas. And our intensivists sitting in this hub could actually guide and treat patients sitting away from the hospital. So there has been a lot of digital transformation that's happened. And I think a significant part of it is here to stay.
Okay.
I think a significant part of it is here to stay. And just because it is delivering value to the people. Anything which people perceive as value will be there to stay. Now, healthcare is all about empathy. Medicine is all about empathy, even during the non-COVID, non-pandemic times. But here, during the pandemic, the word empathy had a much wider meaning for all of us, because we had to be empathetic towards our staff. We were actually sending them to a patient who was infected.
Right.
We were asking them to go and take care of a patient who was infected, while the rest of the world was running away from a patient from an individual who could possibly be infected. Here we knew a person was infected, and we were asked to take care of those patients. So the amount of motivation that they required was a lot. And I think one of the things which really made a difference was communication. As some of the panelists said before that, communication is probably the most important thing. And we are a large organization, 72 hospitals across the country with over 100,000 staff members. And we had playbooks. We had playbook for disaster management. We had playbook for epidemic management, but not for a magnitude of this size. So what we did was we started a new playbook called the Red Book. And the Red Book could not be constant because the disease and the pandemic was evolving all the time. So right. We actually had to keep changing it and keep modifying it with the new knowledge that we gathered from across the world. And we had about 80 versions of the playbook. And all we did was this playbook had everything in it: how to protect the staff from themselves, from the infection, how to protect the non-COVID patients from the infection, how to take care of the COVID patients, what to communicate to the community. So it had everything in it, and all we had to do was we used a lot of Microsoft technology to disseminate this knowledge. We've taken care of about close to 300,000 COVID positive patients in this 8 to 9 months, and less than 1,000 of our own employees were infected.
Let me bring in Rajiv here. Rajiv, something that Dr. Hariprasad referred to, 80 different playbooks. Clearly, you have to be agile to be doing something like that. How did you also have to go through something like that? Constantly had to keep playing, improving your playbook. And the other bit, I just also wanted to sort of hear your view on is, how much of a role data actually plays in decision making, and what sort of technologies, do you sort of leverage for that?
First of all, it's commendable the kind of operation Dr. Hariprasad talked about and what they were going through. I think it's unmatched. And on behalf of the panel, our salute to you, sir. It's just commendable what the healthcare community at large, has done for the pandemic. I think, Manu, coming to your question, of course, creation of these playbooks, creation of these assets was very important. Data plays, to me, a very, very critical role. Look, at the end of the day, as operating officers, what happened in the pandemic was that we lost all signal, right? The signal you used to get when you were in offices with your teams, in your plants, in your machineries, on the shop floor, all that was gone. And
right.
Therefore, the only signal you can get is data. As data is the new oil, as is being used these days, right? But data is the core signal that you get. So it's very important. The second important part is, what do you do with this data, right?
Absolutely.
You've got to drive, your analytics, your machine learning, your artificial intelligence on top of it to get insights out of it. And then I think the third part is also very important, that once you have the insight without action is of no use. Right? You have to put that insight into action, which means you have to inform it back into your operations or
right.
disseminate that information within your employees, right? So there's a constant learning and churning that happens, Manu, that I think all organizations, certainly us, we went through. And that is part of being agile. I think no organization today can be agile or resilient, which is the theme of this talk, without leveraging technology at its core and using data, AI, to create this app.
What does it actually take to be a resilient leader? So maybe we can start with Mr. Jayaraj.
There's no such thing as perfect operations. In fact, perfect operation is an oxymoron. Things will go wrong. And things will go wrong. Don't see that as a setback. It's an opportunity to do better, to learn from it.
Okay. Mr. Ravichandran, your thoughts on what it actually takes to be a resilient leader?
And so I think prepare for basically the previous non-COVID world. As I tell my guy, that is gone. That's just forget about it. And Absolutely. Then now you start looking at the new world, and then be a wartime general. I think that is the theme we are using in Tech Mahindra.
Dr. Hariprasad, are you already a wartime general?
Certain about the uncertainty. There is always going to be uncertainty. And the second thing is to be prepared for the uncertainty. We've learned it that difficult way during the current pandemic, but I guess we'll be more prepared in the new pandemic, if at all a pandemic or any other situation comes up in the future.
Rajiv, what does it take to be a resilient leader, and how do you see the future playing out now?
I think, to me, it's a factor of two things. I think one is this notion of growth mindset. It was being talked about, right? That in this uncertain time, you got to be prepared for, you got to drive a culture of experimentation. You got to keep on making the improvements every day, even if you fail. Learn from what you're failing and then adapt for the next cycle, right? And I think that growth mindset in a leader is very, very key to be resilient. Because if you're frozen in your footsteps, you will not make any progress there, right? That is important. I think the second part, which was articulated in very different ways, whether it is a wartime general or you're being seen in the front, I think is to build trust and empathy, right? Even if you're in the war, empathy basically means I'm listening to what my team is telling me, what my people are telling me, what my customer is telling me, what my partners are telling me, what the government is telling me, and then being able to craft out whatever you want to craft out. So I think a leader who can listen, a leader who can be empathetic to the needs of people, right? And more importantly, then can build trust, which means you're communicating openly. Your say-do ratio is very high. You're doing what you're saying and you're saying what you will do. I think that is going to be very, very critical for all our leaders, in these times like pandemic. You could say this is true anytime, but it is especially true now when there is so much of uncertainty. People can look up to someone who they can trust, who they understand will listen to me, and will drive a growth mindset. I think that's what makes it a resilient leader, Manu.
Absolutely. Gentlemen, on that note, we've had a fabulous discussion, very interesting points on, how hybrid work model is here to stay. People have become, people must be the center of all sorts of plans going forward, democratizing data, being wartime generals, and how technology will certainly play a very important role in being resilient in the future.
Forbes India Resilient Masterminds, powered by Microsoft.